Welcome to another edition of the eSpot with Camille. The eSpot is your location for the latest in entertainment, beauty, and design from the people who make it. Thanks for joining.
And she love me when I'm in it, and she never be pretending. Nothing is friend. She gon' tell you what she bought it, cause she know you can't afford it. Know you can get it. Looking exquisite, no competition. Stay on the pivot. Be watching.
Welcome everyone to Filmmakers Friday, and today I'm so excited to have a special guest who is actually a true friend of mine, Trevor Schmidt. He is an attorney, a litigator, and a podcaster. So he's going to share some great tips that we can all use to make sure we don't get sued or get in some legal mess. All right. Well, thank you so much, Trevor, for being my guest today. And can you tell everyone how you got your start as an attorney?
Yeah, thanks so much, Camille. I'm so just honored to be here. I'm just thrilled to be on your podcast. And so thanks for having me. So how I got started, I guess, is, kind of a silly story, because when I was back in fourth grade, we were taking a bus tour, I think, of Boston. And we were driving through Harvard Yard, and I looked at my parents and I was just like, you know what? I think I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm like, okay, whatever, just sit down, be quiet, please. You're interrupting the bus tour. But for whatever reason, that idea stuck in my head. And then as I went through high school and did things like mock trial and then clerked at a law firm in my hometown, it just continued to seem like the thing that I wanted to do. And so I went to law school, and as I was there, I got kind of pushed towards intellectual property courses, given my background, because I had a physics undergrad background. And so that kind of pushed me towards intellectual property. And so as I was there, I didn't really like the patent and the technical side, but I had a great professor at UNC who did trademarks. And so she kind of connected me in that space with the branding, and that exposed me then to copyright. And so then after I got out of law school, my first job was with a large firm here in North Carolina, and focused specifically on trademark prosecution and protection of people's marks. But then as you work in this field, kind of your exposure to things grows and your, opportunities change. And so I worked with that firm for a long time, representing kind of big corporate interests, and then moved to a smaller IP litigation boutique. Did that for a couple of years, realized I didn't really like the contentiousness of litigation, but preferred working with creatives and working with small companies to help protect what they're doing, help them, commercialize their intellectual property. And so I moved over to a firm that focuses specifically on those types of clients. And that's where I'm at today with Hutchison.
Oh, great. See, you're such a perfect person for this, because first off, what stuck out to me was trademarks. A lot of times people don't really know when they need a trademark, what they should have trademark. Because I know I like initially consulted some friends about, should I trademark my show name? Like, I was so confused by the whole process of it all. So can you share a little bit about trademarking?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, trademarks are really going to be anything that your customers, your consumers, whoever's searching for you, that's how they identify you. And so once you get to a point where you have something that's really unique, that people are using to either search for you or find you in the podcast realm, to find you online, that's starting to function as a trademark, because they're identifying your services by that mark. And so once you start to get that recognition, or once you think it's going to be important to your business, it's really time to start thinking about how to protect that. So there are certain rights in your trademark that arise immediately from use, and those are called common law trademark rights. And as soon as you put up a podcast, or as soon as you offer services, or as soon as you open up your business and start using that mark, you have rights in that mark. But common law trademark rights are limited to the geographic area that you use them. So say, for example, you're a local business and you have a coffee shop, you market just in Raleigh. You're going to have common law rights in that area. Say you are a podcaster or you're a content provider. You put up your stuff on the internet and you say, well, I've got broad exposure. Well, the question really isn't whether or not you're on the internet and everybody can find you, but whether or not where are your listeners coming from? Where are you directing advertisements? And that'll look to the geographic area that you may have some rights. But, assuming that you want something more expansive, that you want to cover the entire country, so that you don't get into a situation where you try to move into a market and somebody else has already got a mark similar to yours. What you want to do at that point in time is file what's called a federal trademark registration. And applying to register your trademark is going to give you rights to that mark across the country, whether or not you've actually used your mark in a specific geographic area. So the way I like to think about it, it's always going to be kind of a cost benefit analysis. As you're thinking about when to file for that federal registration, ask yourself, how much is it going to cost me to have to rebrand, both with regard just to the expenses of changing your collateral, but also how much goodwill are you going to lose from having to change your trademark, and how many people already follow you or already know you under that trademark. And that has to be balanced against the cost of filing for a trademark application.
Sounds like a lot of work. Is it something that you would suggest people get a lawyer to help them with all of that? Because I looked on the website and tried to do it myself once, and I was like, it's not that big of a deal. Somebody else wants to use the e-spot. People are just going to come to me anyway because I have it all over Google. I have it all in my SEOs. Like, it might just help me in that sense too. So when is at some point would you say that it's important to get a lawyer involved with the trademark process, or even with starting their own business, whether it's an art business, content creator, or even podcaster in that sense?
Yeah, I'd recommend reaching out to an attorney sooner rather than later. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. You want to find a partner who's willing to kind of work with you as a young company, and who's willing to kind of grow with your company as you grow. So that, may not be as a startup company or as just an initial podcast or something like that, you may not have the funds to really engage that attorney, but you can ask some questions, you can get some important feedback, and build that relationship early on so that if something does come up down the road, you already have that partner in place. But for things like trademarks, I do recommend people reach out to an attorney to get some assistance, because while some of it is very straightforward, some of it is just filling out a form on the trademark office's website, there's a lot of kind of unique pitfalls that can really jeopardize your application. And those are footfalls that you really wouldn't recognize unless you filed a number of applications. And so I think it's always good to have, it's just some professional advice on those areas. And then whether or not you are the one who executes that application or whether or not the attorney does it for you, that's something that you can ultimately decide based off of the available resources.
Very good. So you're a podcaster yourself. So what were some of the things that you knew going in that you definitely needed to do, or could suggest for other people who are maybe looking at starting a podcast to kind of protect themselves, or what kind of questions that they should ask from an attorney to make sure that, because you kind of don't know what you don't know. And since it is such a new medium and so many people are just on YouTube, on Clubhouse, on whatever, giving out free information that doesn't necessarily mean it's valid or good information. I'd like to get it from the source. And since I've known you since our kids were born, that's my way of making sure I'm always on your friends list that can call for questions. No, I'm kidding. But, I'm curious, like, what were some of the things that you made sure of that you knew going into it as an attorney that you to protect your podcast?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, sometimes lawyers are their own worst clients because, we're so focused on advising other people about their potential risks that sometimes when you get into something of your own, you don't necessarily have that same visibility. You're not looking at it in the same way. And so, it's been a learning experience for me as well. It's because I've never, started a podcast. It was a new thing for our firm as well. And so, part of what we considered is making sure that we had rights to the mark and that there wasn't something out there that somebody else could stop us from doing it. So we did some looking for that. We created the logo in such a way that we made sure that we had the rights to the logo, because I think that's something that a lot of people might not appreciate. But, we talked about trademarks a little bit, but copyright is a whole different kind of animal as far as intellectual property rights go. And copyrights are owned by the person who created them initially. And so unless there is an employment relationship or unless you have a contractual assignment that transfers that ownership, whoever created things like a logo are going to own them. Even if I went to my neighbor and paid them $50 and said, hey, will you develop a logo for me? If I don't have a written agreement that kind of transfers that logo over to me and the ownership of the copyright, they're going to own it. So that could create some problems for you down the road, especially if you start off small but become super famous down the road. You're going to have an issue where now all of a sudden you have something that you need from somebody else and they feel like they have some leverage. So we went through that process and made sure we had some protection there. But as far as kind of having guests on and having content that you're producing and releasing, I think, the medium itself has some natural implications. So the fact that I'm coming onto your show voluntarily, we know what we're going to talk about. I don't think you really necessarily need something like a release or a license from me to broadcast this content. It's implied by the fact that I've come onto your show. But the question really becomes, now what happens if you wanted to repurpose this? So all of a sudden, instead of just, me being on your podcast show, you want to make a movie out of it. You're like, oh, this, the content was so amazing that we're going to make a feature film out of this conversation. Well, that's not something that we necessarily talked about or that I had in mind. And so that kind of adaptation or adaptation or change of an original purpose might be something you'd have to go back to your guest and really talk about and make sure that you had sufficient rights to.
Now, it brings up a good point, because you also are doing documentaries as well as part of your the different trademarks and copyrights and so on. So what are some of the protections or different things that people who may be interested in, maybe it starts off as a podcast, but then it becomes a documentary about the different subject matters they're covering, maybe not so much having Trevor himself in some of the clips, but maybe it's just showing the person in the process of making podcasts, or maybe it's more in depth where they really are doing reenactments, because like crime shows or a crime podcast or something, in that sense. Like, what are some of the things that they should reach out to you about or find out more information before taking that plunge?
Yeah, I think documentaries are really an interesting medium because there are a lot of different issues at play. So you're going to have interviews with individual people, and they're going to be talking about certain issues, and you may need releases or licenses from those people in order to use their content within your film. And you may be taking video clips or books or transcripts from other places, such as libraries or information that's available online. And you have to ask yourself that question: is this something that I am free to use? One of the challenges I think that the internet has created is everything is almost constantly available, but just because it's available and I can access it doesn't mean that I have the right to use it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I have the right to use it in specific commercial applications. And so one of the challenges for people who create documentaries is understanding, what do I have rights to? How much of this can I use without seeking a license or rights from the other people? How much of it is really providing commentary? So one of the considerations that I often hear from documentary filmmakers is, this concept of fair use. A lot of people know that there's this idea under copyright of fair use, but how to apply it? And that's a challenge even for, experienced attorneys to understand exactly what the contours of fair use are. But part of the consideration is, are you providing commentary? Are you providing education? Are you providing something over and above the original application of the work? So if I'm taking a 30-second film clip from a movie and I'm just putting it in my documentary because it looks good or people are going to be interested in seeing that in my movie, that's not really a fair use. But if I pull it in and I'm commenting on how they use lighting, or I'm commenting on the historic significance of that clip and how it influenced the culture at the time, and then interviewing people who kind of were impacted by that, that starts to be a transformation of that original use and starts to look more like a fair use. And so, I think for somebody who's done documentaries, I think that's a lot of what you're going to be looking into, making sure that you have all the rights that you need for the third parties who are working on the film, and then making sure that the people who are working directly for you are transferring all the rights of what they create back to you or back to your business.
So in my movie, who would you like to play you? No, I'm kidding.
What are you talking about? Nobody can play me. It's just going to be me. No, I'm just kidding.
Like, I was just trying to get that in video. See, he gave me rights. He told me who could play him.
That's right.
It makes me think of your wife, Anna. She did a photo shoot for me, and my husband decided to take a nap that day. And so she inserted Bruce Willis and Brad Pitt in his place. I'm like, oh, I guess I know who will play my husband.
It's a spitting image.
Available,
it's perfect. Yeah.
But now I wonder if I could even post that, because I don't know if she got permission first. No, I'm kidding. I guess parodies have that weird area of gray where you kind of can. And even with that, like with Instagram and Facebook, like when you post things on there and people repost it, not always do you have the right to use it if it happens to be an artist or a photographer that like made that made that piece of art or image or so on. So even with that, is there certain things people should be aware of? Because I know I used a hashtag. I don't remember what hashtag it was, but someone's like, hey, I'm really glad you're using this hashtag, but because we have a trademark on those words, do you mind taking it down or taking those words off because it protects our copyright trademark or whatever it was? I don't remember exactly, but that was like in the very beginning of me being on Instagram. I was like, whoa, only using my own trademark or not trademarks, hashtags, or making sure it's got some numbers or something in it to make it different just to be safe. But
Yeah,
are there other
I
things?
think there are a lot of good kind of aspects to that, because I
Yeah.
think one is going to be kind of like photographs. So I think, one of the challenges like we talked about is there are images that are out there that I can access and I could upload to Instagram and kind of promote to my followers and gain followers and gain ad revenue and all those things. But I might not have the right to that photo. So, a lot of what I see kind of on that side of things, I get clients coming all the time saying they've gotten a nasty letter from, a rights aggregator who are representing these different photographers, and they'll send out these letters demanding thousands of dollars of payment because somebody used their photo on Instagram or used their photo on their website or something along those lines. And so again, it goes back to that point. If you didn't take the photo, there's a risk inherently in uploading it to Instagram or promoting it through your channel, or even retweeting or kind of reposting somebody else's stuff has less of a risk, but there's still a potential risk for you if you didn't take that photo. Then there's the question that you just raised, kind of the issue of hashtags, because hashtags have had kind of an interesting history kind of as far as IP protection goes, because the initial purpose of the hashtag for like a Twitter or an Instagram was kind of a search functionality. Mm-hmm. How do we get people to be able to find our post throughout it? So that was a purely functional use. And trademarks really don't seek to protect that type of a functional use. It's something that shouldn't be protectable. But then you had people started to take that same idea, take the hashtag, take that and turn it into a branding element. And once they did that, you started to create kind of this hazy field of some of them are actually trademarks. Some of them are still just this search function. So that goes to say that whoever reached out to you may have had rights in that mark, but at the same time, it may have been a perfectly fair use on your part to increase the search functionality of Instagram. And so one thing that I would kind of say to your listeners as well is, even if you do things right, or even if you have the right to do what you're doing, it's not going to necessarily stop somebody from sending an objection to you saying, hey, you can't do that. So one of the things that people have to take into consideration and talk to counsel about is this real? Is this a significant risk to me? Do I have to take this down? Are they right? Do they have the rights? And even if they don't, what is the risk to me if I don't take it down? Because, there's certain situations, and it's sad to say, but if you have a big enough organization on the other side, even if they don't have the rights to it, they can make your life sufficiently painful that, it just costs way more to you than it would be to just take it down and not use it. And it's a form of bullying, and I don't like to see it, but it's kind of the reality of what we see today. Well,
speaking of bullying, when you're working with different brands and you make content for it, and maybe there's a contract of some sort, or maybe you posted something and a brand reaches out to you because they love what you made and want to use it on their side. How can you protect yourself to make sure they're not using it in perpetuity?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's an interesting question, because when they reach out to you, they've clearly identified some value in what you've created. And so I think for you and for other content creators, what you have to think about is, making sure that you're recognizing that value through the brand's use. And that could be through, promotion and kind of increasing your visibility through the brand's use, but it may also require some sort of a payment. Now, they may not be interested in that at that point, but that's really kind of the calculation that you have to make. And if it's something that you provide them a right to use, I recommend you try to be as clear as far as what that right is. Yeah, you have you can put this on your Instagram feed, or yeah, you have the right to incorporate this into this specific advertising campaign, or let's talk about a contract for you to put this on your website, and what would that look like. But I would recommend being very clear, at a minimum, in kind of an email writing as far as what the rights are that you're providing them, and kind of any limitations that you expect on that, and to make it clear that you kind of own it and retain all other rights to it.
And don't make assumptions, because I did a modeling gig a few years back, and the person is still using my images and won't pay me again and makes all these excuses. And I'm like, they don't know. I didn't know. I don't know. But still keeps using it, even though I've asked nicely. And I try to get attorneys involved. I was like, it's not even worth it anymore, because I don't want the money. I just want you to stop using it. Like that's it. I don't
Yeah.
care about anything else in that sense, just because I don't want to promote a brand that I don't believe in that sense. And it was just impossible. And so I just want to make sure for other people who may find themselves in those situations, how to protect themselves from that. But it's very good to make sure that you give them timelines on how long they can use it for too, because otherwise forever and a day.
Exactly. Well, and I think that's the other challenge too, is a lot of times there's kind of a discomfort about making assumptions, or you don't want to come off as appearing inexperienced. I talked to some clients who are like, this is the first time they've had this gig, or this is the first time they've been approached by a brand, and they're worried about asking for something or suggesting something that will make them look inexperienced. And so they don't want to come out and say, hey, I want to make sure that you're only using this for this purposes, because they don't want to challenge that relationship. But I still encourage people to be clear about what you're providing, be clear about what the other people are getting, and also don't be afraid to try to get it in writing. I think there's this pushback from brands, from companies, from just everyday people. No, that somehow asking for a contract is suggesting a lack of trust, or that we're not good, or that the relationship is bad. But that's really not the case. Really sophisticated businesses contract all the time for simple things, for complicated things. And the reason is because you don't enter into contracts or agreements because there's a lack of trust. You make it clear to everybody what the expectations are. It's expectation setting. It's not an issue of trust or relationship. It's an issue of making sure that everybody understands where everybody else is coming from. And so I'd also encourage the people, don't be hesitant to ask to get things, written at a minimum in email, but also putting it together in a contract if it's sufficiently valuable.
No, see, my agent always handled those things, and it was always like in the voucher, it signs off, this is for 1 year buyout. If you want to use it again, you have to pay again. Like, so I didn't even think that I would have to give this person those same stipulations in writing, because I've been doing this since I was 12. So I was so used to just it never being an issue, and just getting those surprise checks every once in a while when jobs reuse my images and so on. So for someone that I was like, wait, you're a business person, how do you not know this? And so
Right.
on. So that should be a sign too, that don't go into business with people who don't know what they're doing, or don't want to pay you your value in that sense too.
Yep.
So what are some other signs you would tell content creators, podcasters, even brands who may be interested in working with influencers and content creators? What are signs to run, or maybe to renegotiate terms if it's, what are some of the pitfalls in that sense too?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of them would be kind of an unwillingness to contract. If you were working with like a serious other party, and like as an influencer or as a brand, and you wanted to set down the terms of your relationship, and they're like, no, we don't contract. Be like, why? What exactly? Why wouldn't you? Why does this not benefit both sides? So that would create some concerns to me. Any sort of, I guess, lack of clarity as far as payment terms, a lack of clarity with regard to usage, lack of clarity with regard to expectations as far as what the scope of content that you're going to provide, I think all are kind of red flags in some respects. And it could be red flag as in this party isn't really organized and may not necessarily have it all together as far as what the expectations are, or worst case scenario, they've got some sort of ulterior interest and they're really trying to not box themselves in, and not necessarily provide or pay the value for what they're getting from you. And so any type of unwillingness to get specific, I think, creates some concern or hesitation for me. Unrealistic expectations as far as ownership too. I think if you do have a party that is willing to enter into a contract with you, pay close attention to what they're saying about who owns what and who retains what rights. And if you push back on that and say like, no, I read the IP ownership section here and it says you own everything that I create and have all rights and interest to it, and any derivative works that are created off of it, I'm not really comfortable with that. If they won't entertain that discussion and they're like, no, this is our form, we don't negotiate on it, that creates some concerns as well.
Okay, that brings up a good point with platforms, different platforms that you post on, or even stream your podcast through. A lot of times, free doesn't mean necessarily free, because you might be giving away the rights to what you created or put on Facebook. I know there's always these, every once in a while, these people will post, oh, I do not give Facebook rights to use my blah, 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 blah. And it's like, dude, when you signed in, you gave up the rights to all of that. So like, what are some things that, as far as with podcasting, to even look out for when you are deciding which platform to possibly use to stream your content, or YouTube or whatever, because you definitely want to make sure it's places where a lot of people are, where you have a greater chance of reaching your audience, but at the same time, what are you giving up by doing that?
Yeah, and sad to say, it's going to require people to read that, the dreaded terms of service. I sometimes swear that the only people who read terms of service are the lawyers who drafted them. But the reality is, the only way to figure out kind of what you're getting or what you're giving up is to take a look at that. When you create your account, whether it's the platform that you're streaming your podcast through, or whether it's YouTube, whatever it is, take a look at that and see, all right, what rights am I retaining? What rights did they get? Am I comfortable with that? And, for most of these big organizations, I'm not going to go to Facebook and negotiate kind of a change to their terms of service. I'm ultimately going to have to decide, am I getting enough of a benefit from them that I'm comfortable with this? And if that's the case, you kind of have to pick your poison in some respects. But if it's, if you have options and, you can pay a monthly subscription and maintain all of your ownership rights and not give up anything that you need for your company, then, it may be something that you have to do. But really the only place to figure that out is by reading those terms of service or paying somebody else to read them for you.
That's a good point. So on that same point, I think about recently there's been some bloggers who have gotten sued or have put out misinformation, whether intentional or not. And it's become very expensive. Like, there was a blogger that was sued for like $2 million or somewhere in that. I don't want to be exact because I don't want to say who the person is and then I get sued. But what are some things that people can prevent from getting sued by just by possibly sharing wrong information or misinformation? Is there an area there that's gray, or if it's a matter of if it was intentional or not, or does saying allegedly really protect you when you're sharing certain news or so on? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So there's 2 points to that. One is like, what do you have to do so that you ultimately are not legally liable? Mm-hmm. Because that's a different question than what do I have to do to not get sued? Okay. Because again, you could have done everything right and still get sued if somebody's ticked off enough. And they may do it just because they know that they can kind of bury you with the legal expenses. So kind of to the first question, especially if you are covering celebrities or public figures, there are strong protections under libel and defamation laws that, as long as you're not intentionally making a false statement about that individual, that you are protected from, providing information about them, even if it ultimately turns out to not to be wrong. So as long as you're not kind of out there intentionally spreading false rumors, you have some protection under the law.
Like saying Beyonce is part of the Illuminati or something.
Right.
Lyrics. So I'm just repeating lyrics.
That's right. This is not a factual statement. Yeah. This is, I mean, things like that, right. A Beyonce or somebody out there who is a public figure, they have somewhat less protections in some respects than you or I. Like, if you went out, and me as a non-public figure, somebody who's unfortunately completely not famous, and you said that I was a dishonest attorney or dishonest lawyer or something like that, there might be a different standard. There might be a question as far as whether you had any sort of basis to make that claim, whether it was so reckless that you should be held liable for it. So there's a different standard between private persons and public figures and celebrities, and the standard is going to be a little bit different. So you have to think about who your content is, who your subject matter is, whether or not you're specifically identifying identifiable people. So if you said Trevor Schmidt's a terrible attorney, there's no doubt. But if you said
there's no basis, in other words,
who lives in Durham, who's got 3 kids, and I know his wife, but he's a terrible attorney, well, you might be better off at that point in time because you haven't specifically identified who I am. So, there are some aspects of that, but it kind of goes back to my first point. Even if you're legally covered in the fact that you said Beyonce is part of the Illuminati, that's not going to stop her or her lawyers from, sending you a letter or sending you a lawsuit saying, you know what, you owe us $2 million. But so another point that I would make, though, there's a big difference between the headline grabbing statement that so-and-so sued this blogger for $2 million. And then there's what happens after that. Because the headline is grabbed when somebody files the lawsuit or sends the demand letter and then issues a press release about it. After that point in time, most likely that situation got settled for some other amount. Unless there was a really bad act, I don't think that blogger is spending. I don't know the specific situation, but it seems unlikely.
I try to stay away from it. It's like, that's why I don't gossip about celebrities. I don't think it's any of my business. Some of it, like I just, there's enough people already sharing that, and I don't really want to share things that could hurt people or their children. Like I just don't want to. I just don't think it's it shouldn't be part of their job. Like their personal life should be exactly that. Like, I don't know what my doctors do on their off time or who they're dating or not dating or how many kids they have with random people, thankfully. So yeah, it's none of my business in that sense. And it kind of makes them seem like they're invisible or untouchable in that way too, where it's like they can do no wrong and puts them in a higher position than they should be, because it's just a job when it comes down to it. And a lot of times they're like introverts and, like it's not really, they didn't sign up for all of that, especially now with social media and all the other stuff that they have to do. It's like, I don't want to be the person that adds to the insecurity of it all because I have a teenage daughter, you have a teenage daughter and teen as well. And son. So, I know that putting that kind of stuff out there, it has a ripple effect, and I just don't want to be a part of that.
But, yeah, I think that's always good advice. I mean, these are people, and at the end of the day, it sounds corny to say, but they have feelings. They have, people that look up to them. They have other people that they're trying to protect, and if you push them to that point, that's probably when that legal enforcement comes in. But at the same time, if you wouldn't say it to their face, then don't put it on the internet.
That part. Okay. So speaking of saying things on air, off air, tell everyone about your podcast and how it came about. What made you decide to do it? Because I remember you were doing like these Twitch things with lawyers playing video games. So I also want to hear about that. Like, how was that experience as well?
So that's interesting. So the Twitch Lawyers Playing Games was a brainchild of a former colleague of mine, Brandon Huffman, who started his own firm. And, he started doing this as a kind of a way to kind of promote his gaming firm. And I thought that was an interesting idea, and was on his show a couple times to play. I mean, for me, it was just an excuse to kind of go out and play some video games, and that was fun. But I kept that in the back of my mind. And then, I don't know what it was, maybe a couple of years later, I was working with somebody who had, some background in marketing and PR, and she was recording some intros and outros for, I think it was our church at the time that was recording sermons, and they just needed something to kind of lead into that. So she asked me to record some of that. And as we were doing that, we were talking about podcasts. I hadn't really thought about that, but she was talking about the different business podcasts that she was doing and helping people do. And it's like, wait a minute. And so that kind of set the germination for me as the idea of doing one for our law firm. And so out of that, we started the Founders Shares podcast, which is now coming up at the end of its second year, which has been a lot of fun for me to do. We've got over 18 episodes.
Yes.
And it's crazy.
2 years. Wow. Cool. Happy anniversary and congratulations, because not many podcasters make it 2 years. So that's great in itself. Go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So no, I mean, it was just this idea that how do we talk to our clients? How do we talk to the people that we represent about their stories? And to me, it's always been interesting. What prompts somebody to start their own business, to make them think that they can do it, and then to have the wherewithal to kind of build it up to something that has value and is something that other people will put their money into. And what have they learned along the way? So that was kind of what I wanted to hear. And personally, I just wanted to have those conversations with people. And being a podcaster gives me the excuse to ask those questions without any sort of reservation. So that was the initial idea. But then kind of in the midst of that, we've also started to do more episodes with our attorneys, saying, all right, what are top 10 things that founders screw up kind of as they're starting their company? What do people need to know about taking on outside investment? What do people need to know about IP protection? And so most of our episodes are interviews with founders, and then we're interspersed those with kind of legal knowledge type stuff.
Well, let me know when you do one on NFTs and cryptocurrency, because I don't even check my spam folders anymore, because it's just always you want to make $1 million with crypto, or I can show you how to invest in crypto or NFTs, and or I'll get how to buy followers, and yeah, like I don't even check. So sorry if you happen to email me, it ends up in that folder. I don't like, it's just too much. And as quickly as Instagram and Facebook can be about COVID things, they seem to not be as fast as with spammers. So it's like, why can't you tag that and get rid of it?
Please stop DMing me.
Free iPhones. No, there's not. Like,
Right.
you know, so let me know when you do one of those, because I feel like it kind of feels like an MLM or pyramid scheme to me in a way. Like I just don't find how it's valuable in a way,
Yep.
or how you can make money off of it in a way. And so
there's two aspects to it, because I think there's, you know, it's a lot of stuff that we're talking about now, and a lot of our clients are in it in different aspects. And so I think the underlying technology that is supporting NFTs, you know, blockchain, and that is going to have some amazing applications for real good technology in the long run. I think kind of the current craze with NFTs, I think really is an MLM or it has questionable value. But the reality is, whether it's art, whether it's NFTs, whether it's collectibles, those things only have values because people say they do. And so if there is a market, if people are interested in this for whatever reason, it has value. Do I think it has any inherent value? I really don't. And I think there's a lot of confusion for NFTs about what rights that you're getting. And you see that in all of these kind of horrific stories across the internet right now about, I bought an NFT, you know, the most recent example there was I bought an NFT of a copy of the Dune book. People spent millions of dollars on an NFT of a specific copy of Dune. They thought they owned all of the rights for it. We're going to, you know, go make a movie, kind of go redo the films. And there's just this lack of understanding of what you're getting. And being able to own one specific embodiment of code, which is the NFT, does not mean you own the copyright in the image that's depicted by that NFT. It does not mean that you own anything outside of that, unless that's specified in your agreement with whoever sold it and whoever had the rights originally.
Well, there you go. You heard it here first.
That's right.
Save yourself on the NFTs. Just go to cryptocurrency, because I did hear like some value, not some value, but why cryptocurrency is valuable is for people who don't have easy access to banks. That's their way of being able to transfer money, or maybe they can't qualify for certain banks, or all of those different, like younger teenagers and so on. Like maybe you can't get into a bank yet, or, you know, there's other ways for them to shop and share, whatever, or even just if you're selling things internationally, it's an easier way than using PayPal or whoever. So I've heard it's great, especially if you're doing more international things. But overall, I was just like, I'm not doing the stock market with it.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, crypto does have those advantages.
Yeah.
Cryptocurrencies do have a certain amount of middleman removed, because you're not relying on banks to kind of process transactions. You're relying on code and the functioning of the underlying system to kind of facilitate those transactions. And so I think there are some advantages to it. It creates some inherent risks as well, because there are other people who want to, you know, move money around without being tracked by either banks or the government. And so that kind of automatically arises with it as well. But then there's also just this huge swing of, you know, of value right now, as there's nothing really to kind of tie these cryptocurrencies to a specific point. And that's true of, you know, other currencies as well, but there's just swinging so much right now. So if you got paid the equivalent of $10,000 in cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin last November, and you held on to it, all of a sudden that's not worth nearly what it was before. And so being able to withstand those fluctuations is also a challenge at this point.
Right. And don't lose your password. Did you hear about the guy who lost his password and lost all his money or something?
Dude, like I've seen these pictures of people like digging through like the dump, essentially trying to find their password to their crypto wallet, because they have millions of dollars they just can't access. So to have that problem.
Oh, rich people problems. Well, anyway, make sure everyone knows how they can follow you, keep up with your podcast as well, and any other information you'd like to share as well.
Yeah, sure. So easiest way to find me is going to be at our law firm's website. That's Hutchlaw, HUTCHLAW.com. I'm Trevor, and find me there. Our podcast is Founders Shares. So that's available anywhere you get your podcasts. So check us out and take a listen. And then also on Twitter at InRayTrevor. So hit me up there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today. I really appreciate all the invaluable information that you shared with us today. And make sure you guys check him out and follow him, and make sure you listen to the podcast to get more information on how you can protect your assets. All right. Thanks again for tuning in to the eSpot with Camille. I'm your host, Camille Cower, and make sure you're following me and check out my website, CamilleCower.com, and subscribe. Thanks.
Thanks, Camille.
She gon' tell you what she bought it, cause she know you can't afford it. Know you can get it, looking exquisite, no competition, stay on the pivot. Who be watching, they be plotting, she so motherfucking independent. Mama be big, got on her grind, she had to get out her mama house. Daddy be tripping, now she be whipping, ain't no more on granny couch. Fashion over, got that air looking different, make me wanna put her all in my mentions. Feeling like she was sent from above, got me asking the Lord for forgiveness. Walking with confidence, look at her ambience. The reason these hoes be talking her IG.